There are a lot more shelves in my basement that I haven't shown you yet. Hello, welcome to my channel. Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I'm continuing with the fourth of my bookshelf tours. I am picking up where I left off with my mass market paperbacks. There will be genre books. There will be literature books. There will be nonfiction. There will even be some drama. In the last video, I ended up in the middle of BL and accidentally cut off one author with a few books unshown because they were in a shelf in my storage room. But I will show you those books. But before I continue, stop and pause just a little bit. If you think you know me, try to predict some of the books that I will be showing. As I said, I'm going to be picking up with BL authors and continue through the end of my C authors. So from BL to C, what books could I possibly have? See if you can guess a couple of the titles and authors. To start off with, I'm continuing with Robert Bloch, Psycho 2, the sequel to Psycho. Unfortunately, this paperback used to have a step-back cover, but someone tore it out. There is also no copyright page on this edition. How odd. Psycho House by Robert Bloch, the third sequel in the Psycho series. Cold Eye by Giles Blunt, a novel from the 90s, a thriller murder mystery about painting. Choice Cuts by Pierre Bourroughs, translated from the French, originally published in the mid-60s. This is a French mystery thriller about transplants. I think it's going to feature a complete head transplant. Billiards at 9:30 by Henrik Boll, translated from the German. Boll won the Nobel Prize in Literature. The Clown by Heinrich Boll, translated from the German. This is about an ex-Catholic clown. Group Portrait with a Lady by Heinrich Boll. Not sure what this one's about. The Lanny People by J.F. Bone, a science fiction novel from the 60s about artificial women being sold as sex slaves. A double novel, Crime d'Amour by Paul Bourget. Just look at the man making his moves on that nice lady. Germaine by E.N.J. Duconcourt. Again, a Frenchman making his moves on a nice young lady. These are novels translated from the French from the early part of the 20th century. The Bridge Over the River Kwai by Pierre Boullier. This novel is translated from the French. It's a World War II story. Pierre Boullier, Garden on the Moon, again translated from the French, a science fiction novel. Pierre Boullier, translated from the French, Planet of the Apes. I'm sure most people are familiar with the Planet of the Apes movie, but this novel, written in the 50s, is actually really pretty good, except for a few outdated things like rocket ships. But this has a double surprise ending that's not included in the original movie. Mars by Ben Bova, a science fiction novel from the 90s about terraforming Mars. Ben Bova, The Precipice, a science fiction novel from the early aughts. Darkfall Landing by Marion Zimmer Bradley, a fantasy novel, or maybe a combination of fantasy and science fiction from the 70s. This is the first in her Darkfall series. Another double, we have Galactic Breed by Lee Brackett. That lady seems to be in some trouble. Then we have Conquest of the Space Sea by Robert A. Williams. Both these novels, I believe, are from the 50s. Far Fields by Gary A. Braunbeck, a horror novel from the late aughts. This comes in the leisure horror line, that great publisher of trashy horror back then. Galileo by Bertolt Brecht, an historical play translated from the German. Razorback by Peter Brennan, a killer animal horror novel from 1981 about a wild pig. I think this one is set in Australia. The Liquidator, #1 by R.L. Brent, the first in a violent new series about a rogue cop going ape on the mob, originally written in the 70s, and now way out of print. Mooncalled by Patricia Briggs, an urban fantasy series about a sexy shapeshifter. Earth by David Brin, a science fiction novel from the 90s. Kiln People by David Brin, a science fiction novel from 2002. Looking on Darkness by Andre Brink, published in the 70s. This is a novel banned in South Africa about the troubles they were having back then. Zorander by Christine Brooke Rose, a postmodern science fiction novel about an intelligent asteroid. The Late Great Creature by Brock Brower, a horror tale to shock the unshockable 70s. The Unorthodox Corpse by Carter Brown, a detective novel from the 50s. The Brazen by Carter Brown, a mystery novel from the 50s. Flight of the Old Dog by Dale Brown, a novel that took after the success of Tom Clancy. Engine Man by Eric Brown, a science fiction novel. The Phoenix Guard by Stephen Burst, a fantasy novel that's a homage to The Three Musketeers. Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov, translated from the Russian. This was a Soviet-era novella about a dog who has human testicles transplanted on him and becomes somewhat of a human being. Octavia E. Butler, Parable of the Sower, one of her great science fiction novels. Octavia E. Butler, Parable of the Talents, a continuation of that great science fiction series. Junkie by William S. Burroughs. It's about William S. Burroughs' addiction to heroin. Two novels by James M. Cain, The Embezzler and Double Indemnity. Technically, this is a hardback, not a mass market, but it's so small it looks awkward on my hardcover shelf. This edition was published in the 40s. Prison Ship by Martin Caidin, a science fiction novel from 1989. This novel contains a very early trigger warning. Publisher's note. As Martin Caidin's dedicated readers know, there are no compromises in his work. It is his specific pride as a storyteller to render faithfully the reality which he describes in this novel featuring convicted felons of Earth and beyond. The explicitness of language and the graphic violence of certain scenes may well startle or even offend some readers. Therefore, with the author's approval, have flagged particularly graphic scenes so that readers who wish may avoid them. You know, people, teenagers back in the 80s were flipping to those scenes. Martin Caidin is more famously known as the original author of The $6 Million Man. Taylor Caldwell, Wicked Angel, a sort of horror novel. Ecotopia by Ernest Collenbeck, an ecological thriller from the 70s. Demons by Daylight by Ramsey Campbell, a collection of horror short stories. The Nameless by Ramsey Campbell, a horror novel. A Happy Death by Albert Camus, translated from the French. This is a draft of his first novel that he never published in his lifetime. It is a predecessor to his more famously known novel, The Stranger. Caligula and Three Other Plays by Albert Camus, translated from the French. Existential French plays. Gotta be a winner. The Possessed by Albert Camus, translated from the French. This is his dramatization of Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Possessed, sometimes known as The Demons or The Devils. Lyrical and Critical Essays by Albert Camus, translated from the French. Resistance, Rebellion, and Death by Albert Camus, essays translated from the French. Camus, of course, won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Sword of the Golden Stud by Ashley Carter. This is a sexploitation novel about life on southern plantations before the Civil War. Manchu by Daniel Carney, an historical novel about trading with China in the 19th century. It comes with a fabulous step-back cover. It was published by Zebra. If you're old enough to remember Zebra publishing, you know these books are going to be just a little bit on the cheesy or sleazy side. The Warrior of World's End by Lynn Carter, a fantasy novel published in the 70s. Lynn Carter was an author who tried to match up to Robert E. Howard and never quite succeeded. The Enchantress on World's End, the second in the Godwin saga. The Immortal of World's End by Lynn Carter, the third in the Godwin saga. The Barbarian of World's End, the fourth in the Godwin saga. The Pirate of World's End, the fifth in the Godwin saga. The 13th Spy by Nick Carter. This is part of the Killmaster series, which were men's adventure espionage books. There are many, many books in this series. Nick Carter is the main character, although he is given credit as the author. There were numerous authors who wrote in this series. I am not familiar with them all. Michael Crichton apparently wrote a few. I don't think I own any of the Michael Crichton written Nick Carter books. Nick Carter, The Mind Poisoners. Nick Carter, The Chinese Paymaster. Nick Carter, The Bright Blue Death. Nick Carter, Berlin. Nick Carter, Checkmate in Rio. Nick Carter, The Defector. Nick Carter, The Human Bomb. Nick Carter, Assassination Brigade. Nick Carter, The Arab Plague. Nick Carter, The Executioners. Nick Carter, The Executioners. I have 2 copies of this book. I think one of these books needs a new home. Nick Carter, The Mark of Cosa Nostra. Nick Carter, Ice Trap Terror. Nick Carter, Assassin, codename Vulture. Nick Carter, The Kathmandu Contract. Nick Carter, The Novetzky Plot. Nick Carter, The Living Death. Nick Carter, The Coyote Connection. Nick Carter, Operation McMundru Sound. Nick Carter, The Outback Ghosts. Nick Carter, The Condor. That's a lot of Nick Carter books. Midnight at the Well of Souls by Jack L. Chalker, the first in the Nathan Brazil Well of Souls series. This book is actually a lot of fun. Exile at the Well of Souls, Jack L. Chalker, the second in the Well of Souls books. Quest for the Well of Souls by Jack L. Chalker, third in the Well of Souls. The Return of Nathan Brazil by Jack L. Chalker, the fourth in the Well of Soul books. Twilight at the Well of Souls by Jack L. Chalker, the fifth, or is this the sixth in the Well of Soul books. Embryo by Louis Charbonneau, a novelization of the movie. I'll Bury My Dead by James Hadley Chase, a pulp detective novel, published by Harlequin Romance. Kiss My Fist by James Hadley Chase, a pulp crime novel. Just look at that very inappropriate cover. Altered States by Patty Czerfewski, a science fiction thriller from the 70s. Where Are the Children by Mary Higgins Clarke, a mystery thriller from the 70s. The Whipshot Scandal by John Cheever, literary fiction from the 50s. Ward 6 and Other Stories by Anton Chekhov, translated from the Russian, one of the great Russian short story writers. Chekhov, The Major Plays. I'm not really impressed with Chekhov as a playwright as compared to his short stories. Anton Chekhov, Selected Stories. More great short stories. Down Below Station by C.J. Chera, a science fiction novel from the 80s. The Faded Sun trilogy by C.J. Chera, 3 science fiction novels from the 70s. Death Comes as the End by Agatha Christie, an historical novel set in ancient Egypt by this great mystery author. The Mysterious Mr. Quin by Agatha Christie, one of her more traditional mystery novels. Against the Fall of Night by Arthur C. Clarke, published in 1953. This was his first novel. The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. This is a revision of Against the Fall of Night. When he got to be a more established author, he was dissatisfied with his first novel, so he essentially rewrote most of it. The story is essentially the same, but with some subtle differences. The Deep Range by Arthur C. Clarke, a science fiction novel. The Slide Path by Arthur C. Clarke, of course, science fiction. The Other Side of the Sky by Arthur C. Clarke. Report on Planet 3 by Arthur C. Clarke. I have not read this one, but Earth is the third planet around our sun. I wonder if there's a connection in that title. Songs of the Distant Earth by Arthur C. Clarke. The Wind from the Sun by Arthur C. Clarke. Breeder by Douglas Clegg, a horror novel from the 90s. Dark of the Eye by Douglas Clegg, another 90s horror novel. The Best of Hal Clement, edited by Lester Del Rey, short stories by this grand master of science fiction. The Nitrogen Fix by Hal Clement, one of his science fiction novels. The Black Death by Gwyneth Cravens, a 70s thriller novel about bubonic plague coming to New York City. Not impressive at all. Taipan by James Clavell, the second in his historical Asian saga. Gaijin by James Clavell, the third in his Asian saga. King Rat by James Clavell, also part of his Asian saga and my personal favorite. It's about World War II prisoners in a Japanese internment camp. Spaceways #1 of Alien Bondage by John Cleave. This is an erotic science fiction novel. John Cleave is the pen name for Andrew J. Offutt. Coma by Robin Cook, a medical thriller from 1977. I believe this was Robin Cook's first novel when he was still a doctor. Sphere by Michael Crichton, a sort of science fiction thriller novel. The Andromeda Strain by Michael Crichton, about an alien virus that comes to Earth. Pacific Vortex by Clive Cussler from 1983. This is one of his Dirk Pitt series of men's adventure. Squirm by Richard Curtis, a novelization about a movie featuring killer worms. That is the end of my BL authors to C authors in my mass market paperback shelves. Did you guess any books that I had on them? If you did, please leave a comment to this video. Thank you so much for watching, and keep on reading.